the 1.2 million, up to 1.2 million women who had illegal abortions before Roe, in my view, were vindicating the truth, their experience, and they were personally suffering the consequences of anti-abortion laws and violating them, rather than, and doing so very individually and very personally, rather than by attacking the state. The women who had these illegal abortions, they, like people who do satyagraha, believed that there should be a legal system, but viewed the particular law they were violating as simply wrong, as not simply wrong, but immoral and inhumane. And many of them describe in those letters taking their action after very serious moral consideration, thinking about their own lives, potential lives, the legal, medical, and moral consequences, which I would argue was very much holding on to the truth and allowing that to guide them. And they did what they did in violation of, in a nonviolent manner. Though those women were not saying, I'm going to have an abortion because I want to be part of a mass movement of civil disobedience to take down these totally unjustified laws criminalizing abortion. I argue that intentionally or not, it very much is comparable to a coordinated act of mass civil disobedience. And the impact of that was very similar to what we see in other forms. It had a huge effect. It turned the American Medical Association from the organization that sought to have abortion criminalized in the 1880s to an organization that finally began to speak out to have those laws reformed or repealed. Emergency room doctors faced the aftermath of illegal abortions. They couldn't save the life, for example, of a 15-year-old. Hospitals, as the documentary The Janes, had whole wards that were just for women who were suffering sepsis and a lethal form of infection. They just had entire floors for women who had illegal abortions and even with a total hysterectomy could have died, and many did. Brothers, fathers, and sons of women who died or became sick or lost their capacity for reproduction as a result of illegal abortion were persuaded that the criminal abortion laws were wrong. And why did those clergy members form the Clergy Consultation Service? They had so many parishioners coming and confessing that they had an illegal abortion. They planned to commit a crime by doing it, and they could not sit by and watch only their parishioners take the risks challenging immoral laws. And according to political scientist Rosalind Paczewski, she believes that the most important factor leading some states, and in the around 1970, about 3 states, I think it was Washington and New York among them, did reform or repeal their abortion laws. And eventually the Supreme Court decided to recognize the fundamental right to choose abortion was the public health crisis that was created by the number of women having illegal abortions. It radically changed how people were thinking about abortion at a time when there were all kinds of resistance. It was really a very short period of activism before Roe v. Wade was decided. It was less than 10 years of real activism, much of which was the exposure of all of the illegal abortions were happening. So 1973 happens, and the Supreme Court decides Roe v. Wade and recognizes a fundamental right to choose abortion. It radically improved public health almost overnight. You stopped having deaths from criminal abortions. It also meant that infant mortality decreased because women weren't forced to carry unhealthy pregnancies to term. Dobbs held that the right to abortion was not deeply rooted in the history and tradition of our country, that it was not implicit in the concept of ordered liberty. And it's just insulting, frankly. There are a whole series of Supreme Court decisions that talk about what liberty means. One of them is Meyer v. Nebraska. It's a case where in Nebraska where Mr. Meyer is teaching German, Nebraska has a law against teaching German, and he's arrested under the law. And the decision there's no, you can read the whole Constitution. No place in the Constitution does it say you have a right to teach German or any other foreign language. And yet the court understood that the word liberty, which does appear repeatedly in the Constitution, denotes not merely freedom from bodily restraint, which, by the way, often is required to force someone to continue a pregnancy to term, but also the right of the individual to engage in any of the common occupations of life, to acquire useful knowledge, to marry, establish a home, bring up children, to worship God according to the dictates of his own conscience. That is exactly what was expressed in all those letters, including I had an abortion because my religion required me to do what was in my conscience and what was permitted by my religion. So you have the essence of liberty is exactly why women are having abortions. And this Supreme Court, the majority, the MAGA majority says, oh, we can't think of any way in which abortion is covered by our Constitution. Worse than that is the history of the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendments. These were the amendments that came after the Civil War to try to rectify what had happened, taking a group of human beings and enslaving them, dehumanizing them, and taking away every right that they had. And Professor Peggy Cooper Davis at NYU Law School wrote this book, and then an op-ed in the Washington Post right after the Supreme Court said, oh, no, we can't find any constitutional amendment that would protect abortion, and said, oh, no, you are so wrong. That one of the clear purposes of the 13th and 14th Amendments ending slavery, guaranteeing equal protection of laws, due process, and liberty to all citizens who are born, was to address particularly, explicitly, what had happened to enslaved Black women. And as my friend Deborah Small says, the picture sums up the total of early American history. The wealth of the nation was derived literally and figuratively from sucking on the teat of African American women. Since colonial times, and I talked a little bit about this and the resistance enslaved women were engaging in to sometimes end pregnancies while they were enslaved, Black women were the profit making. They needed, once slavery, what no longer, people were no longer allowed to import slavery and enslaved people, as Jefferson said. The way that slaveholders made money was by reproducing other slaves and selling them. And they made more money from doing that than they did from their crops. And Black women who were enslaved were subjected to rape, to forced labor, sexual exploitation. It was a complete denial of their bodies and their lives. The point of those amendments was to rectify exactly to ensure that people had reproductive control over their lives. So, had the MAGA majority on the Supreme Court wanted to find very explicit language, there was liberty, and you had the purposes of the Reconstruction post Civil War amendments as clear authority for continuing to recognize a fundamental right to choose abortion. Instead of doing that, they returned the issue to state legislative bodies. They did so knowing that 81% of them are white, over 71% of them are male, knowing that at that same time, the same MAGA court was tearing down the voting rights law, and knowing that they were the actual statute that got upheld and that resulted in overturning Roe was from Mississippi, whose history was to undo the gains that had been made during Reconstruction and the promises made to formerly enslaved people. So Dobbs didn't quite say that fetuses are persons, but they left it to the states to do that. And once you allow states to legislate in the name of the rights of fertilized eggs, embryos, and fetuses, you open the door to every form of gender discrimination imaginable. Because we haven't had it happen yet, but let's say a state said women, people with the capacity for pregnancy, no longer can work as firefighters and police officers because they might get pregnant. And we are doing this out of respect, our desire to respect and preserve prenatal life. According to Dobbs, I think they'd have to uphold it. You can't outlaw about abortion without outlawing the people who sometimes need them. and that this would be the right way to read the decision, that our historical understanding of ordered liberty does not prevent our elected officials from deciding how women should be regulated. So, what happened since Dobbs? 12 states took up their opportunity to pass laws banning abortion altogether, and six more essentially do by saying you can't have one after 6 weeks, which is after people find out that they're even pregnant. So, you have states that have taken up the offer and the possibility of banning abortions. And the impact has been pretty clear. Women with high risk pregnancies now have very limited options. There's not just a lack of access to abortion care in those 12 plus 6 states, but you have a lack of access. You have what are called maternity care deserts because the people who provide abortions don't want to be working there. And you have various health problems associated with pregnancy soaring. You also have deaths, and ProPublica has been doing an amazing job documenting specific arrests that they can tie to laws prohibiting abortion. So women, once again, not out of their fasting until they die, until these laws are changed, but they are dying. And we hope that, among many other things, does have an impact on how people view these laws and state authority to control people. Maternal mortality in the United States was during Roe, and especially awful for Black mothers. It is now, maternal mortality continues since abortion, and infant mortality is rising as well. And again, because of the maternity and healthcare deserts from doctors fleeing states where abortion is banned, because women who are forced to continue to the pregnancies to term, even when they have unhealthy pregnancies, these are the consequences of Dobbs and other things that are happening. But prohibition doesn't work. Prohibition has never worked, whether you're talking about abortion or drugs or alcohol. Prohibition is a tool of oppression. And that undermines human rights and public health, and people will resist that. And they will resist it in numbers big enough, with an impact big enough, so that things have to change. There are fewer women dying from abortions that are not legal, thanks to the medications, misoprostol, misoprostol and mifepristone, which people, even before Dobbs, were getting ready to make available to people in this realm of illegal public health. So research worldwide shows that restricting abortion freedom does not lead to fewer abortions. It never will. Those having them do act as a form of mass civil disobedience. And I think we need to take heart, as much as we took heart from the people in Minneapolis standing up and singing and standing for what they believed in. All of the organizations that are providing abortion care, that are raising money for people to access care from the countries they can't, and the groups like the Religious Network for Abortion Funds and the renewed Clergy Consultation Service, which I hope includes clergy from some of those 12 plus 6 states that have recriminalized abortion, are engaging in very meaningful resistance. And I hope you will take heart from that. I know that I do. I share with you what keeps me going, the lessons that Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum teaches. No one can do everything, everyone can do something. And whether you're an abortion provider or somebody getting an abortion or escorting women, helping them find a way, or donating to abortion funds, you can also shine the light every Thursday, as I am so proud to have done with Nancy Stearns, who filed the only brief in Roe v. Wade that made an equal protection argument, and Dr. Catherine Morrison, who not only provides abortion care, but has a clinic that combines birth and abortion to ensure that whatever happens during pregnancy is respectful.